The sight of my belongings scattered across the front lawn hit me like a physical blow. Clothes, books, photos. My entire life strewn carelessly on the grass for all the neighbors to see. But it was the changed locks that truly drove the message home. After 3 years of marriage, this was how it would end. Locked out of my own house while my husband served overseas. "Oh good, you're finally here." Sandra's voice dripped with fake concern as she emerged from the front door, my front door. "I was worried your things might get wet. It looks like rain." My name is Claire Martinez, and at 29, I never imagined I'd be facing homelessness because of my mother-in-law. But then again, I never imagined a lot of things that had happened in the past year. "Sandra," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "What do you think you're doing?" She adjusted her designer cardigan, the same smug smile she'd worn since the day I married James still firmly in place. "What needs to be done, dear? Now that James is deployed, this house should be properly taken care of. By family." I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. "I am family. I'm his wife." "For now," she said, examining her manicured nails. "But let's be honest, Claire. You never really fit in with us. James will understand once he's home. I'm sure he'll be relieved to find I've taken care of everything. Everything. Like the life I built here with James, the home we made together, the memories we created in every room." Sandra had always made it clear she thought James could do better than a public school teacher from the wrong side of town. But this was a new low. "This is illegal," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police." Sandra's laugh was sharp and cold. "Go ahead. The deed's in my name, always has been. I just let you two live here while James got settled in his career. But now," she gestured to my scattered belongings, "now it's time for you to go." The worst part was she was right about the deed. The house had been a gift from her when we got married, one she never actually transferred to us. Just another way she kept control, kept us dependent. But what Sandra didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I'd been preparing for something like this. You see, while Sandra saw me as just a simple teacher, I'd been quietly building a life insurance empire right under her nose. For the past 3 years, I'd worked part-time as an independent insurance agent, specializing in military family policies. Every commission, every bonus, every extra dollar had gone into a separate account, one that now held enough to buy this house 3 times over. But more importantly, I had something else. Something hidden in that house that would make Sandra regret ever crossing me. "Fine," I said, surprising her with my calm. "Keep it. Keep the house." Sandra's perfect eyebrows drew together in confusion. "What?" "You heard me." I started gathering my clothes from the lawn, maintaining my composure. "If the house means that much to you, it's yours. I'll be gone within the hour." She stood there, clearly thrown by my lack of resistance. This wasn't how she'd expected this to go. She'd wanted tears, begging, a scene for the neighbors to gossip about. Instead, she got calm acceptance that seemed to unsettle her more than any argument would have. "Well, good," she finally managed, though her voice had lost some of its edge. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." I smiled, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. "Oh, Sandra, I'm always reasonable. It's one of the things James loves about me." I spent the next hour methodically packing my belongings into my car, ignoring Sandra's watchful gaze from the porch. She was waiting for the breakdown, for the moment my calm facade would crack. She didn't know I was counting the days until everything would fall apart. For her. That evening, I checked into a small extended stay hotel on the outskirts of town. The room was basic but clean, with a kitchenette and enough space for my essential belongings. The rest I put in storage, all except for one small box that never left my sight. I called my best friend Rachel once I was settled. "She did what?" Rachel's voice rose with each word. "Claire, this is insane. We need to call James, tell him what his mother's done." "No," I said firmly, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed. "James has enough to worry about right now. He needs to focus on staying safe, not dealing with his mother's games." "But, trust me," I cut her off. "I have a plan. Sandra thinks she's won, but she has no idea what's coming." After hanging up with Rachel, I opened my laptop and logged into my email. There it was, the confirmation I'd been waiting for, the message from the bank that would start everything in motion. I thought about the hidden USB drive in the house, carefully concealed behind a loose baseboard in what used to be my home office. On it was every document, every email, every piece of evidence I collected over the past 3 years. Sandra's smug face flashed in my mind. She thought she knew everything about me, had me all figured out. The poor teacher who'd somehow snagged her precious son. What she didn't know was that I'd been watching her too, documenting every questionable transaction, every suspicious business deal she discussed during those family dinners she used to torture me. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized months ago, just in case. Mr. Davidson? This is Claire Martinez. I believe it's time to move forward with what we discussed. The lawyer's voice was steady and professional. Are you sure you want to proceed, Mrs. Martinez? Once we file these papers, there's no going back. I thought about Sandra standing on my porch with that triumphant smile, about the years of subtle digs and not-so-subtle attempts to drive a wedge between James and me, about how she'd waited until he was thousands of miles away, serving his country, to make her move. I'm sure, I said firmly. It's time Sandra learned about consequences. I hung up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. In less than 2 months, Sandra's perfect world would come crashing down. Not just because of what I knew about her business dealings, but because of something much more personal, something that would shake her carefully constructed image to its core. The next morning, I went to work as usual, standing in front of my 7th grade English class like nothing had changed. My students had no idea their teacher was now essentially homeless, or that she was orchestrating the downfall of one of the city's most prominent socialites. During my lunch break, I received a text from Sandra. Left a few more of your things in garbage bags by the garage. You should collect them before someone thinks they're trash and takes them away. I smiled at my phone, imagining her face when she realized what was really going on. The funny thing about karma is that it always seems to find its way back to people who deserve it most. That evening, I drove past the house, watching Sandra host one of her weekly dinner parties through the large front windows. She'd already moved in completely, erasing any trace of my existence from the home I'd shared with James. I could see her gesturing animatedly to her guests, probably telling them some version of events that painted her as the concerned mother protecting her son's interests. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. It would be evidence, another piece in the puzzle I was carefully constructing. Then I drove to the bank, where I had an appointment with the manager. Mrs. Martinez, Mr. Thompson greeted me warmly. I have those documents you requested. Are you sure you want to proceed with this? I nodded, taking the thick envelope he offered. Absolutely. Has anything been disturbed in the safety deposit box? No, ma'am. Everything is exactly as you left it. Perfect. I smiled, thinking of the contents of that box. Contents that would make Sandra's perfectly styled hair stand on end if she knew about them. Let's proceed with the next phase. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with another text from Sandra. Found some mail addressed to you. I'll be burning it with the rest of the trash tomorrow. Hope nothing important. I saved the message. More evidence. More fuel for the fire that would soon consume her carefully constructed world. Sandra thought she was clever, thought she held all the cards. But she had no idea what was really at stake. That night, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and began typing. Dear James, I hope you're safe. Everything here is fine. Don't worry about me. Your mother is being her usual self, but I'm handling it. Focus on your mission and coming home safely. That's all that matters. I love you, Claire. I stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send. The lies felt bitter in my mouth, but they were necessary. James needed to concentrate on staying alive, not worrying about his mother's machinations or his wife's sudden homelessness. Besides, by the time he got home, everything would be different. Sandra would learn that the quiet teacher she dismissed so easily had teeth, sharp ones. I pulled out the small box I'd kept with me and opened it, revealing a single photograph. It showed a much younger Sandra, standing next to a man who wasn't James's father, holding a baby that looked exactly like James. The date stamp told its own story, one that would shatter everything Sandra had built her life upon. Sleep well, Sandra, I whispered, closing the box. Enjoy the house while you can. The real storm hasn't even started yet. The next 6 weeks passed in a calculated blur, while Sandra played queen of the manor, hosting her dinner parties and redecorating my home. I was setting everything in motion. Each morning, I'd wake up in my hotel room and check another item off my list. The USB drive I'd hidden in the house wasn't my only insurance policy. There was also the safety deposit box at the bank, the offshore account I'd set up under an LLC, and most importantly, the paper trail I'd been creating since the day Sandra first showed her true colors. "Are you sure about this?" Rachel asked one evening as she helped me organize documents in my hotel room. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back." I looked up from the stack of papers I was reviewing, bank statements, property records, and one particularly damning DNA test. "She threw me out of my home while my husband is serving overseas. She's been trying to destroy my marriage for 3 years. Yes, I'm sure." What Sandra never understood was that teachers are excellent observers. We spend our days watching, learning, understanding patterns. And I've been watching her for years, documenting every slip, every questionable transaction, every whisper phone call during family gatherings. The real estate deals that seemed too good to be true, they were. The charitable foundation she ran, a tax shelter that hadn't made a legitimate donation in years. But those were just the appetizers. The main course was something far more personal. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Davidson's number. "Everything's ready," he said before I could even ask. "The papers will be filed first thing Monday morning. Are you prepared for the fallout?" "More than prepared," I replied, looking at the photograph I kept with me. "How long until she's served?" "Given the nature of the complaints, she should be served by Wednesday at the latest. The bank will receive their notices simultaneously." Perfect. Right in the middle of her weekly lunch club meeting. The next few days passed slowly. I went to work, taught my classes, and waited. Sandra had stopped texting me taunting messages, probably assuming I'd given up and accepted defeat. She had no idea she was about to learn the true meaning of the phrase "quiet waters run deep." Wednesday arrived bright and clear. I was in the middle of teaching the Odyssey to my 7th graders when my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "It's Hey P.E. Nang. She just got served at the country club. Complete meltdown in progress." I smiled, thinking about how the scene must be playing out. Sandra, surrounded by her society friends, being handed papers that would destroy everything she'd built. By now, she would be reading about the federal investigation into her foundation, the proof of her real estate fraud, and most devastating of all, the truth about James's parentage. The truth I discovered in that photograph, confirmed by DNA testing and supported by decades-old hospital records. James wasn't just not his father's son, he was the product of an affair with a man Sandra had paid to disappear. A man who, until recently, had been receiving regular payments from a hidden account I'd managed to trace. My phone started buzzing nonstop. Sandra, finally realizing the extent of what was happening. "What have you done? You think you can destroy me? I'll ruin you." James will never believe this. I ignored the messages, continuing to teach my class about Odysseus's long journey home. Sometimes I thought the best revenge is simply letting someone's own actions catch up with them. By the time I left school that afternoon, Sandra's perfectly constructed world was in flames. The bank had frozen her accounts pending investigation. The foundation's board members were scrambling to distance themselves. And her social circle was exploding with the news that their queen bee had been living a lie for decades. But I wasn't done yet. I drove to the house, my house, and parked across the street. Sandra was on the front lawn, screaming into her phone, her perfect hair coming undone. A police car sat in the driveway, and 2 officers stood nearby, apparently trying to explain something to her. I pulled out my own phone and dialed Mr. Davidson one last time. "Is it done?" "Just finished at the courthouse," he confirmed. "The deed has been updated to reflect the true ownership. The police should be enforcing the order now." You see, what Sandra didn't know, what she never bothered to check, was that James had signed the house over to me before his deployment, not just as a resident, but as the sole owner. We'd done it quietly, legally, without involving her. The deed she claimed was in her name, a clever forgery she'd been using to maintain control. I watched as an officer handed her more papers. Even from across the street, I could hear her scream of rage when she realized what they meant. She had 1 hour to vacate the premises or be arrested for trespassing. My phone rang. A familiar number from overseas. James. "Claire," his voice was tight with concern. "What's going on?" "My mother's leaving me crazy messages about being set up and something about my father." I took a deep breath. This was the hard part. "James, honey, we need to talk. There are some things you should know." For the next hour, I sat in my car and told my husband everything. About his mother's years of manipulation, about the truth of his parentage, about being thrown out of our home. He listened in silence, only speaking when I finished. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You need to focus on staying alive, I said simply. I could handle your mother. He was quiet for a moment. The house is mine. Legally, just like we arranged before you left. Your mother's being removed as we speak. Good, he said firmly. Claire, I'm so sorry. For all of it. Don't be. Just come home safe. We can deal with everything else then. After hanging up, I watched as Sandra was escorted off the property by police, her designer bags hastily packed with whatever she could grab quickly. The neighbors were all watching from behind their curtains, phones undoubtedly buzzing with messages about the scandal unfolding on their street. I waited until Sandra's car disappeared around the corner before driving up to my house. The key I'd kept, the one she hadn't known about, slid perfectly into the lock. Inside the place was a mess. Sandra's attempted redecoration half finished, my remaining belongings piled carelessly in corners. But none of that mattered. I was home. I walked through each room, reclaiming my space. In the office, I knelt down and carefully removed the loose baseboard, retrieving the hidden USB drive. I wouldn't need it anymore. Its contents had served their purpose, but I kept it as a reminder. My phone buzzed with a final text from Sandra. You've made a terrible mistake. This isn't over. I smiled, taking a picture of myself in the living room and sending it as my only reply. Let her rage. Let her threaten. The evidence was already with the FBI, the IRS, and every board member of her precious foundation. Sandra's reign was over. That evening, as I sat in my reclaimed home, I opened my laptop to write another email to James. Dear James, I'm back in our house. Everything's taken care of. Your mother? Well, she's learning that actions have consequences. I know this is all a lot to process, especially about your father. When you're ready to talk about it, I'm here. For now, just focus on coming home. We can figure out the rest together. I love you, Claire. In the weeks that followed, Sandra's empire crumbled completely. The fraud investigations led to criminal charges. The society circles she'd ruled over closed ranks against her. The truth about James's father became public knowledge, destroying the carefully crafted image she'd maintained for decades. She tried to fight back, of course. Hired lawyers, claimed conspiracy, even attempted to contact James directly through military channels. But the evidence was too solid, the paper trail too clear. In the end, she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. 3 months later, James came home. We sat in our living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and talked through everything. The truth about his father hit him hard. But as he said, it explains why she was always so controlling. She was terrified of losing her grip on the lie. Are you angry? I asked him, watching his face carefully. He took my hand, squeezing it gently. At her? Yes. At you? Never. You protected our home, our life together. You did what had to be done. We heard later that Sandra had moved in with a distant cousin in another state, her reputation and finances in tatters. Sometimes I think about her, rattling around someone else's house, probably still plotting her comeback. But I don't worry about it anymore. You see, the quiet ones, the ones people underestimate, we're the ones you should watch out for. We observe, we remember, and when pushed too far, we strike with surgical precision. Sandra thought she could bully the quiet teacher, the woman she never thought was good enough for her son. Instead, she learned that some people are like icebergs. There's far more beneath the surface than what you can see. As for me, I'm still teaching, still helping my students understand the Odyssey and other tales of long journeys home. But now they're learning from someone who knows firsthand that sometimes the greatest victories come not from loud battles, but from quiet, patient planning. And that photograph, I kept it, tucked away safely, not as a weapon anymore, but as a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing, just like karma has a way of finding those who deserve it most.